I never expected peace to feel like something I could own. But after retirement, after 3 decades working as a geological and environmental consultant, half of them spent in crisis zones and forgotten places, peace wasn't a luxury, it was something I fought for, and once I had it, I was not about to let it go. My name's Matthew Colton. I picked my little house above West Echo Lake for one reason. It sat just outside the reach of the Silver Glen HOA, tucked away on a patch of hillside that builders once thought too wild and uneven to flatten out. To me, that was perfect, a place where the land still felt alive, where native grasses swayed on the slope and the rocks told stories if you looked close enough. I'd built my own terraces out of old stone to keep the hillside from eroding, planting seeds by hand, careful not to disturb more than I had to. Years ago, when Echo Lake was almost lost to reckless construction, I'd been part of the team that cataloged and protected this very watershed. The files from that era were still in my attic, a reminder of why this place mattered, why it had to be left alone. So when I heard the machines, those first deep, grinding rumbles drifting through the early spring air, I figured maybe someone nearby was fixing up a septic tank or pouring a new foundation. But the sound kept coming, hour after hour, shaking the ground like a warning. Let me back up a sec. If you've never lived next to land you love, it's hard to explain what it's like to watch strangers tear into it. I walked around the edge of my property and froze. There were earth movers, a dump truck, and a crew in neon vests not just working near my land, but on it. They were carving huge sections out of my slope, dumping topsoil into a truck like it was just trash to be hauled away. I called out, voice sharp, and one of them looked up from his radio and told me the HOA had authorized the work. They were removing fill for the lower basin, he said, pointing toward the lake, mumbling something about a drainage stabilization project. I knew exactly what he meant, the natural floodplain at the edge of Echo Lake, the one every environmental report for 20 years said should be left alone. It was nature's safety valve, not some problem to be fixed out. I told them they were trespassing. They didn't seem to care, said their maps showed the land as community property. That was a lie, plain and simple. I had the deeds, the county registered markers, even the boundary stones I'd set myself when I bought the place. So I took photos of the damage, called the HOA, and demanded answers. No one had the guts to show up in person. That night, I barely slept, running through the possibilities in my head. What if they kept digging? What if they triggered a slide? What if no one listened? The next morning, I measured the damage. Not only had they crossed my line by at least 30 feet, but they dug straight through a fracture zone, a weak spot I'd flagged years before. If they kept going, the whole slope could collapse right into the lake. Old habits kicked in. I documented everything: soil types, slope angles, GPS pins, just like I was back on contract. I sent evidence to the HOA, the county zoning office, and the state environmental agency. I wanted them to know I wasn't bluffing. A few days later, the HOA mailed me a violation notice, claiming I wasn't maintaining my land. I laughed out loud. They were trying to cover their tracks by blaming me. But what they didn't know was that I understood this ground better than they ever would, and I still had friends in the right places. By Friday, a quarter of my slope was just gone, scraped bare. The wild sedge and fescue I'd nursed for a decade replaced by piles of broken rock. What bothered me most was the speed. They were working like they knew they'd get caught, racing the clock. I followed their tracks down to the lake, where I found them dumping my soil into the basin near the old picnic tables, right where the floodplain used to breathe. Now it was being packed flat, bright banners promising a new playground by summer. But there were no silt fences, no erosion controls, just raw earth bleeding into the water. Echo Lake isn't just a pond. It's a state-classified conservation body, federally protected, with strict rules about what you can and can't do within 200 feet of the water. This wasn't just reckless, it was illegal. I filmed everything, narrated it like I was back in the field, then spotted the HOA president, Karen Albright, clipboard in hand, watching the chaos like she owned it. I confronted her. She tried to brush me off, saying the maps proved the land was undeveloped and within community purview. I showed her my surveys, my records, but she just got sharper, more political. This is for the neighborhood's benefit, she said, like that made it right. The next night, another violation notice. This time for obstructing HOA operations. It was almost funny, but there was nothing funny about watching a place you love get destroyed. I reached out to Miles, an old colleague now at the EPA, sent him everything. I got a reply in less than a day. We're coordinating with state enforcement. Please don't confront the contractors. Finally, someone was listening, but the damage was accelerating. The lake was changing. Where it used to shine like glass, it was now cloudy, a greenish film where dragonflies once swarmed. Fish disappeared from the shallows. The wild marsh turned into a mud platform. I dug deeper, found HOA documents showing plans for an amphitheater, expanded paths, all on top of the basin. The contractor? Delridge and Sons, the same company cited for violations in another town. No permits. No environmental impact reports. No public notices. They were hiding everything. So I kept building my case. Printed everything, organized it in a binder, and prepared to go public. At the HOA's next open meeting, I walked in, sat front row, and called out their president on the missing permits. She dodged, tried to shut me down, but this time people noticed. That night, the state DQ emailed me. Site review scheduled. Echo Lake flagged for emergency assessment. The work didn't stop, though. Trucks came early, left before lunch, the mess growing each day. I filed public records requests, spoke to the township clerk, a tired woman who handed me the only permit on file, trailhead maintenance. No mention of shoreline excavation. Not a word about the lake. Things got ugly fast. The HOA started talking about me on the neighborhood board, calling me uncooperative, even dangerous. But I wasn't alone anymore. Ruth, my neighbor 3 houses down, stopped by. She'd seen the budgets, caught off-book payments to the contractor. She slipped me copies of damning emails. The HOA was plotting to build a case against me, call me aggressive, set me up for censure. But Thursday came, and so did the state. For SUVs, EPA jackets, tripods, water samples, the works. The findings were clear: unpermitted fill, no buffers, direct contamination of a protected water body. The lead inspector told the HOA to halt all work immediately. Karen Albright lost her composure. She tried to protest, but this time, the state didn't back down. The next morning, the machines were silent. Bright yellow tape fluttered in the wind around the scarred basin. I made more coffee, climbed into the attic, and dug out the old field files, proof that this land was never used. That afternoon, I scanned the maps and sent everything to enforcement. Ruth brought over banana bread and a folder full of suspicious payments. We pieced together the timeline. They laundered project funds, fast-tracked permits, and covered it all with phony newsletters about beautification. Rain fell hard that night. At 2 a.m., an emergency alert, slope instability detected. I raced to the lake, joined by state inspectors and glowing headlamps. The platform had shifted, nearly collapsing, silt pouring into the water. By morning, all work was suspended. The HOA was officially under investigation. A few days later, I was summoned to a hearing. I didn't go alone. Ruth and several neighbors came. People who'd once ignored me now quietly offering support. Inside, Karen tried to turn the tables, accused me of weaponizing bureaucracy. But this time, the truth was louder. Ruth spoke up, too. The rest of the board, caught between shame and fear, remained silent. That week, the EPA escalated. Full compliance order, restoration required, federal oversight invoked. As the lake began to heal, the neighborhood changed, too. The HOA board shrank. Karen resigned, slipping away one morning without fanfare. The town posted signs: Echo Lake Restoration Area, protected by law, managed by residents. I was asked to chair the restoration committee. Ruth joined, and soon, so did others. We planted native grasses, watched the dragonflies return, and hosted workshops for kids and parents. People grumbled, sure, lost trails, canceled picnics, but eventually, even the critics saw what we were building. Sometimes I still find seed packets left on my porch. No notes, just quiet thanks. The hill still bears its scars, and so do I, but each morning I work to mend them, one handful of soil at a time. Healing isn't about returning to what was, but growing something better out of what remains. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it comes quietly, in clean water, in wildflowers, in the laughter of a child chasing frogs where a playground was supposed to be. But here's the thing. I didn't save the lake alone. It was the land, the truth, and a few people willing to listen when it mattered. You know what I mean? Now I ask you, where do you stand when something you love is threatened? Tell me below. Who was right? Who was wrong? Was it worth it to fight for a place most folks barely notice? Let's talk about justice, community, and what it means to prod.